Hey, what's going on? Levi here from Digital Epidemic, coming at you today with another tech video here, and I am sitting at a desk full of computer parts so that I can do some show and tell and talk to you about what all is inside of a computer and what it takes to get one up and going, what all this stuff is and does. So let's jump in. What all's in a computer? I've got a couple back here behind me. This one, the main computer I use every day. A couple older guys back here behind me. Obviously, to start any computer, you're gonna need a case. So we got this big old hunking case here. We got this big old guy here and that one back there. Inside the case, we've got some core essential pieces that you're gonna need to get any computer up and going. And that is going to be a motherboard and CPU. So right here, this is a motherboard. This huge heat sink is covering the CPU, but essentially the motherboard is your inputs and outputs. It's handling everything that you're wanting to input into the system and everything the system's wanting to output to you. The CPU, one of these little guys, it is doing all the calculations. It's the brain, it's doing all the math for us. And since I have a bunch out, let's just take a tour back in time here. There's some 286s, some 386s, 486s, all the way to a Pentium. Look out. I have a whole box of them because I did computer repair in the 90s, so that's why we have so many 486s in there. I do have one broken here. We can kind of look at that cool little guy going on there. But those also have a heat sink sitting on top of them and a fan and all kinds of stuff to make them run cooler because they are going to be like one of the hottest things inside the PC. To get the computer going, we need an input-output board, a motherboard. We need a CPU to be our brain, and then we need somewhere to hold information. We're gonna start with RAM. Here's some sticks of RAM here. And our RAM, it's gonna act kind of like this desk as far as office goes. Because what I mean by that is everybody used to always ask me, what is memory? What's memory? I need to upgrade the memory on my computer. And I'd be like, okay, do you need to upgrade the storage or do you need to upgrade the RAM? RAM is the memory that you're temporarily using. So like this desk is RAM, a filing cabinet is a hard drive. So there's your two different kinds of storage, hard drive and RAM. So our RAM is the desk. As you can tell, we've got a nice big U-shaped desk here, nice big U-shaped desk, but I have it completely full. So if this was RAM, we could say it's 64 gigs of RAM, but we're using 64 gigs of RAM with this project I have out now, maybe 63 and a half. RAM comes in sticks like this, and these just have aluminum heat sinks built onto them to try and dissipate the heat, but essentially these I'm sure look just like these here. This one's double-sided and has just a whole row of chips on it. And now storage is hard drives. We got our little pile of hard drives over here. Your hard drive is gonna be more like your filing cabinet. That's where you're gonna permanently store things. So you permanently store files on this, you temporarily store files on this, just while you're using them. Hopefully that made sense. When it comes to hard drives, this right here is a platter style hard drive. It is a SATA connection on the back here. The older connections used to have a 40-pin IDE cable. So then you had this giant ribbon cable going through the computer, like this big thing right here, but then that got replaced with just a small SATA cable like this. And now hard drives have evolved a couple times since this iteration even. So this is a platter style hard drive where there's 2 to 3 platters inside spinning around, kind of like a CD, except that there's a little aperture arm flying across it, reading and writing across it using magnets and storing the information using magnets. And since this, we've kind of upgraded to more of like a flash style hard drive where they're using more chips inside of this guy to do the storage. Kind of like the way the chips are here on this RAM, except this is a very temporary storage solution because as soon as you turn the computer off, everything would flush out of your RAM. As opposed to a hard drive, it would be permanently stored on here. So on the newer ones called SSDs or solid state drives, there's no moving parts quite like this, where if you dropped it while it was on or kicked it or hit it, it could really mess up that arm. It could crash into it. Almost every single one of these drives over here is broken with some kind of information written on the top of what it sounds like when it's on. This one's a tick. This one's a tock tock. That one's a click clunk clunk. So these hard drives were fairly fragile, which wasn't as big a deal on a desktop computer, but definitely was not ideal for a laptop. But like I said, That's been superseded by the solid state drive, which is more like a thumb drive. Inside this machine here, I've got a couple SSDs. Right there and right there, they're just laptop size hard drives. And then I've got a regular desktop size platter style hard drive right there. And then that's even kind of being superseded now by M2 hard drives, which look more like a stick of RAM in the way that they're designed, kind of around the same size, but still using that solid state idea or flash memory idea on it. So that's storage. Computer's pretty much taken up the same footprint over time, even though everything's gotten bigger data-wise. So like this RAM is just a little bit smaller than this RAM, but like this one to this one doesn't look that much bigger, and this one to the one that's in my machine isn't physically that much bigger. So these are 4 gigabytes sitting here. These are 1 gig sticks. These two right here are 2 gigs a piece. So here's 4 gig between these 2 sticks. So these 4 equal the same as these 2, except these probably run a little bit faster. And then this machine has 16 gig between these 2 sticks, but they're essentially about the same size. And then the same thing with hard drives. They've pretty much been the same footprint since the beginning of the small personal computer, that is. This one, for instance, is 850 megabytes, whereas this guy right here is 1 terabyte. I don't know why I'm being so gentle with them. They're all dead. When it comes to megabytes, we've got 1,000 megabytes in a gigabyte and 1,000 gigabytes in a terabyte. So this guy is 850 megabytes or 0.8 gigabytes. And then this one sitting right next to it that's pretty much about the same size physically is 1 terabyte. And they just keep getting bigger, and over time they're about the same price. I'm sure I probably spent 100 or more on this and 100 or more on this when they all came out. So to get our computer up and going, we need a motherboard, a CPU, and some RAM. From there, it can be turned on after we use a power supply. So power supply, it's taking in your 110 house voltage and it's converting it to DC 12 volts and 5 volt and I think even a 7 volt rail in there for all the different required things that you require different voltages within your system. So with the power supply, a motherboard, CPU, and RAM, we could turn this thing on as long as it has built-in video. Now, what I mean by that is, so I had already said earlier, your motherboard is a lot of inputs and outputs, meaning you can input different cards on the slots, input different hard drives, and then output to different ports on the back. After a while, they started just building everything into the motherboard. But at one time, you kind of had to have a card for every single thing that you wanted. You had to have a card for video if you wanted to output video. You had to have a separate card for sound if you wanted to output sound out of your machine. But now they just build it right in. So this blue, there's video. So that means there's a chip already on the board doing the video output for us. Because of that, we can pretty much have a system off the ground with just motherboard, CPU, and RAM and power supply because the video and everything is already built in. Now, once we've put all that together in a case, in order to start interacting with it, we obviously need a keyboard and mouse, but we also need some kind of drive, whether that be a USB port and we plug in a USB drive like something like this, or you could still use an optical drive like this. Let's see here, we got a DVD rewriter. Look out, a super writer. So this one was a DVD and it hooked up via SATA. But before SATA, it was also 40-pin IDE. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of fans inside to try and keep these things cool because they are super hot machines. That's just a case fan there. But even like the graphics cards, after they stopped being just this thing that only pushed video to the screen and started becoming something that could really do some heavy 3D work and video game stuff, they started having dedicated graphics like this that had their own cooling system built into them. So that would be your GPU or graphics processing unit. Same with this guy right here. Let's look at a few examples of these different things that I've just shown you. So now, if this is a motherboard, let's take a look at the machine that I use every day, right over here. We got the motherboard in the back there, and then we need RAM. That would be this stick there, and this stick right over here. The CPU is under this cooling unit right there. We've got motherboard, CPU, and RAM. And then this machine does not have built-in video on the motherboard, so it has a video card right there and also Power supply down here. A little bit newer power supply with the modular plugs and such instead of just one huge clump of cables coming out the back. Let's take a look at this guy over here. We got motherboard in the back there, CPU fan. Behind that would be our CPU. Right over here is where the RAM goes, but they are not in this machine anymore as I have them out there on the desk over there to show and tell. Power supply down here at the bottom. This one also does not have video built in, but it does have audio there. And let's go ahead and go to this last one, getting even older as we go backwards in time here. Motherboard in the back here. We've got slots for the RAM over here, which I've also taken out to show and tell. CPU fan right here, CPU underneath, power supply up here at the top, older style, and then a whole bunch of drives, optical drives, hard drives. I think this one even has a floppy still. Look out. So let's say we have our motherboard, we've stuck some RAM in it. It has a video card, processor's already on this one. Hook up some power to it. Click, click, click. We've got a working unit after we plug it into a monitor and power, of course. Then all you need to do is just install an operating system after you install some kind of storage. Now you could install an older hard drive like this, newer hard drives that pretty much almost look like RAM, the M2 hard drives, or you could even just run it off of a flash drive, like something like that. Let's talk really quick about the ports on this motherboard across the back. We've got old school PS2 mouse and keyboard ports, an old parallel printer port, and a serial port, and an old style VGA. So this thing is pretty obsolete. But on the back of newer style motherboards, instead of those older ins and outs, you're gonna have something like USB 3.0, SATA port. We've got a built-in network interface card to do Ethernet network cables. We've got more USBs here, more USBs, and this one even has optical audio out. More USBs. This does have an old school PS2 port in case you do have an old keyboard and mouse, and built-in audio for input and output on audio. So as far as input and output, we've got this port over here. This is a pretty old one, but same idea. No matter what kind of ports you have, you can expand the capabilities of the computer using ports like this by using smaller cards. Like this, for instance, was a Sound Blaster Audigy. If you wanted to upgrade the audio on something like this, you would just plug it in right there. But let's say that we wanted to expand the functionality a little bit more than just upgrading it. You could get even cards like this one right here that would let you input a TV signal. So this has like a threaded coax cable. So say you had your old wedding video, you wanted to upgrade it off of a cassette tape, an old VHS, and onto a DVD. You just hook that VCR right up to the back of your computer right there, hit play, hit record, and boom, bam, you got a digital file. There's lots of other expansion cards also. You could even expand it with more USBs. You could get a card like this that just gave you 4 more USBs, especially if your computer wasn't that old, but a new USB just came out, like USB 5 or something, and you wanted to upgrade, but didn't want to upgrade the entire motherboard. You could get an expansion card. All right, well, there was some computer parts show and tell for you. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something, what a motherboard does. Inputs, outputs, CPUs, the brain of the whole machine, RAM. It's like your desk. It's how many things you can have open at once and be working on as far as projects go. Hard drives, more permanent storage for all your files. Dedicated graphics cards, what they look like and what they do. Extra add-on cards for inputting video or exporting audio. Optical drives, what they look like outside the machine. Power supplies and what they do, as far as taking 110 power and converting it to 12 volt DC with enough watts to power all of this stuff we see out here on the desk. Anyways, I think that's all I've got for us today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and special shout out to my Uncle Mike for showing me all this amazing stuff when I was 9. He came over and fixed the computer. I was pretty good at breaking it, but he came over and opened it up. It wasn't this one, but he opened it up and it was just stuff flying out everywhere. And I was just overtaken by how awesome it looked inside there. Just guts, ribbon cables and stuff everywhere. And I was totally taken back by it. I loved it. So love you, Uncle Mike. Thank you so much. I miss you lots. Thanks so much for watching the video. Hit all those cool things down at the bottom, like likes, subscribes, and bells, and notifications, and comments, and all that awesome stuff. Interact with me on this thing, and it'll just spread this video like wildfire. Or at least that's the hope. Thanks so much for watching. Bye. We'll get to enjoy the video too, because I don't know why. Jeez.